From my story to your story, let's talk about grief. I will share my own grief journey, along with interviewing others about their path of sorrow and healing. I hope that you, the listener, will hear something that helps as you navigate your own grief, and that God will be glorified along the way. This content is meant as a discussion and not to give professional help. Let's get started.
So I have here with me today my missionary, Dallita Goins. They are missionaries to Honduras, and Dallita suffered a tragic loss. Her son went home to heaven at a young age, and I'll let her tell us about what she would like to tell us about those circumstances. But I'm thankful for her joining me today and just being willing to share some of the things that she's learning along her grief journey and how maybe that can be a help to others. So Dallita, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Sonia, for the honor. Really, it is. And since Matt and I lost our son, I think that our desire has been more than anything that God would use it for His glory. And I'm a boy mom. I have 3 boys, and Jadon is my middle one. We were close as a family, and close-knit family, because of being on the mission field and doing everything together. Our boys were born in a little over 2 years. So there's about 12 to 14 months between each of them. Okay. So I had Joash in 2003, Jadon in 2004, and Justice in 2005. So, I would say perhaps a little more close-knit than your normal family from the circumstances and our backgrounds. And so, yes, Jadon is my sweet middle is kind of what I called him. Oh. And all 3 with different personalities, just a wide spectrum between the 3 of them. Joash went to Pensacola Christian College, and the next year Jadon followed him. Okay. And so Jadon was in his freshman year at Pensacola Christian College in Florida, and he was working for the college. He was in his 2nd semester, had been home for Christmas, and had gone back, had celebrated his birthday in February. Okay. And on March 21st, we got a call that afternoon, and Matt had it on speakerphone, and it was Joash. And he said, Jadon was at work and a truck veered off the road and hit him, and they're taking him in an ambulance to the hospital. Okay. And that's all we knew. So the next few moments are like blurry, but yet they were at that moment just, it's like almost like you're living something that's you're not there. You're like, it's almost like an odd out of body experience. Maybe everything moves slow. It's indescribable, really. Mm-hmm. So we called Justice home. He was at our neighbor's house, a fellow missionary, playing soccer with the boys. And so we called him home, and we were praying. Obviously, as soon as we got the news, call, the first thing we did was we just prayed right there where we were, and called Justice home, contacted family, friends, the church, asked for prayer. We really didn't know anything, but at that moment, so many thoughts, going through our heads, what it could be. And, you start even right then in that grief process of bargaining. May it not be. Yes. And it can't be, because this is not your story. And so I think around 45 minutes went by before we got the next call. So in that time, we surrendered. We were all personally praying on our own in different rooms, back together. Just time is strange, and during those moments, and we got the second call, and it was Joash, and he said he's gone.
Oh, and your son didn't even have to tell you that.
Joash was there, and yeah, I mean, there's so many ins and outs, and details that maybe you maybe wish could change, but you know that God's in control, and some details that you're like, wow, you're so good, God. And that was a hard one. It was hard that Joash had to be there and be the one to see him. And praise God, he had a pastor. The pastor from the campus church was actually there with him when he
Okay.
got the final news. And so he wasn't all alone
Right.
in the ER. And so when he called us, the pastor was with him. And so he initially gave that, that sentence and then passed the phone to the pastor. Um, and so, yeah, so our Jadon went to heaven, and we believe it was instantly from, even though they took him to the hospital, they did everything, CPR, and the driver actually was the first person that started the CPR, and there was never any response.
Okay.
And so we believe he died instantly. He went to heaven instantly. So that was a great comfort,
That
even
is a
though at
comfort.
the time we didn't know a lot of details. Things started to we started to get more information. And yeah, yeah, I mean, there's nothing to describe a moment like that. It's nothing that you ever anticipate, or
Mm-mm.
really, I believe, even prepare for, that your child is taken instantly. Uh, I remember a friend of mine, son was going off to the armed services. And
Mm.
I was kind of like, oh, I don't think I want my son to do that. I know that sounds very unpatriotic, but
No, I get
there's
it.
just so
Yes.
much more risk,
Yes.
risk of
Yeah.
losing a child
Right.
when they're in the armed services, going off to war or whatever. There were things going on. And I remember kind of thinking that she seemed really excited and happy. And I remember in my heart thinking like, oh, I'm not sure that I would be like that. And, her son is still alive and well today, married and has a
Right.
child. And we don't know what God has written for our story, but Jadon's story was 19 years long and a little over a month. Um, and so, yeah, that's our, that's the
The
moment that really
background of,
changed our lives forever, our family. Um,
and it does change you. You're right. It does change you. And my loss is, I'm not going to try to compare it because no two losses are alike and it's not the same kind
right,
of loss. But I mean, you're exactly right. On one side of it, you just cannot imagine what it's like on the other side of it till you're there. And you hope
right.
other people don't
Mhm.
have to know it, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
right, right. Yeah, you just never plan for tragedy.
and so
It seems like it's always somebody else's story.
right,
You never think
exactly,
it's going to
until
be
it's
yours.
yours. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
Couldn't have said it better. And so for me, as one, as you all being missionaries, we support, and I followed you all on Facebook as far as, I mean, I would see your posts from time to time and keep up with you on the field. And of course, word spread what happened. And we've been praying, our church has been praying, I've been praying. And in that time frame, when I have read your post on Facebook, I have felt like you articulated so well the rawness of how awful grief is and the feelings you battle as a human being. It's
mhm,
not all just, oh Lord, I can thank you for this, or this, I can see God
mhm.
in it right now. And you were
Yeah,
very transparent about that. And yet, you shared how you what your thoughts were that brought you back to the Lord on it all. And so today I had asked, we're going to kind of go over some of those, if that's okay.
mhm.
Your post on feeling that God had betrayed you made an impact on me. I have tried to be transparent about my grief and yet bring it back to God or honor God with it. And you did that so well, expressing the feeling of being betrayed, but how you worked through it to gratitude. And I'd like to just, would you describe that prayer, how you felt after Jadon was killed and then getting to the place you could still be grateful to God?
Yeah. I think that post was quite a bit later on. I think that
Yes.
it was things that I struggled with early on, but
Mhm.
it's just so deep
Yes.
that to share it is not easy, but I felt like the time had come. And I hope that it would help other people,
Mhm.
because we do tend sometimes as Christians to try to just bear up and put on a brave face.
Right.
And so I think that I could say it like this, as far as that feeling, like a lot of moms, I had prayed since my children were babies, before I had them, as they were babies growing up. Um, I prayed for them, and as I developed a deeper prayer life, I would pray for each one generally and each one specifically.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I would pray specifically when they started heading off to college is I prayed that God would protect them
Yes.
physically and spiritually, and that he would place his angels around them, whatever that looked like in the spiritual realm, to
Right.
protect them physically and spiritually. And so I know that this might sound um, weird to some people, but I felt in my mind's eye, I could see that the angel had moved. And
Ah,
I knew that that wouldn't happen without God allowing that
right.
to happen.
Right.
And so I felt like my father
Hmm.
hadn't done what I asked him to. I confided in him. I had trusted in him that he would protect physically and spiritually. And anyway, so that's just kind of, I felt like my father had betrayed me, my trust in him. And
That's such a good way to put it, because that is how you feel when you've prayed for something and then God
yeah,
chooses to do something else. It's like,
completely like
you let me
opposite,
down.
really. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so, like, as I mentioned, and I think in that specific post, that I felt like grief and gratitude do walk hand in hand, because I had to come to the point where I realized that my father would only choose good for Jadon,
Hmm.
even though I don't see it as good, and the
Right.
whole hurts.
Right.
But I was able to get to a point where I could understand that Jadon is perfect now.
Right.
He's whole. He doesn't struggle with sin. Um, and so I think that in the midst of that, I had to get to the point where the gratitude was able to hold on to that through the grief, that comforting thought that God's plan is good.
Yes.
Um, that really came about, I think, I mean, it was a process, but I came to a point. I was talking with my sister on the phone, and I may have mentioned that in the post, and
Hmm.
I just broke. It was in April, and you can be pretty raw with your sister.
Yes. Yeah. I
And I
have two
just cut
sisters,
loose.
by the way. Yes.
And I just cut loose with that that was just in that turmoil inside, that I wouldn't share that with a lady in my church.
Right.
you know, and I just told her, I said, he he I feel like God betrayed me. And she just listened. She didn't judge. She didn't
Mm.
quote verses. She just listened. She cried. She cried with me. And then later that day, she sent me a sweet, sweet note. And she's like, God loves you so much that he sent his son. And if that's not love and that's not a good God, that's, what is it? So coming back to that, the gospel and
True.
God's goodness.
True. Thank you for that. And
Yeah,
I really think what your sister did too is a good lesson to people, that sometimes what we need is
I
just
think
somebody
so.
to listen, cry with
Yes.
us, think
Hmm.
about their response before they
Yeah.
respond.
Yeah.
Those are good helps too. Um,
Yeah.
Also, you mentioned about not wanting to be chosen for this task after a friend talked to you about being chosen for it. Explain that to me.
Yeah. It was a sweet friend. And she said it actually, it was just days after Jadon had gone to heaven. And her intentions were truly to encourage,
Oh,
to
sure.
help. But I remember later that day, and I was actually in the shower, and I was just crying. That's a good place to
Yes.
mourn and grieve.
Yes. I
And I
agree.
just I didn't shout, but I was sobbing, and I just told God, I was like, I didn't ask to be chosen for this. I think that you chose the wrong person.
Mhm.
And there's that guilt too, because you think about people like Mary, like Jesus's mother, what did she probably didn't know what she was getting into, honestly.
Right. True.
But her spirit was so sweet. Her surrender was just, here I am, I'm your handmaid, do as you want.
Mm,
And I didn't feel like that at all.
no.
When I surrendered to go to the mission field, I think that we view that as a surrender of our own life and not the lives of our children.
Oh,
So,
good point.
in those moments, all of us have done that as Christians, I believe, at some point where we've said, God, my life is yours. Do what you want to with it.
Sure.
Kind of like Mary, but I don't think that I realized that that included my children.
Right.
I don't think I
Right.
grasped the depth of that they're his. And when I surrendering is surrender, whatever that looks like. And so, yeah, being chosen is an honor. Um, it's not something that I deserve. And honestly, she wasn't the only one that said that. Another missionary that we met a few months later, he had lost his son several
Mm,
years before that. And that was his word of encouragement to us was he said, we have been chosen for this. And you just don't feel up to the task. I remember thinking like I don't even feel like getting out of bed.
yes.
It's hard to breathe. It's hard to think. It's hard to imagine even smiling again or I remember watching a movie for the first time after Jadon went to heaven and it's like, can we really be like watching a movie?
Right.
Like when
Should we do this?
yeah, my life feels over. And
Right.
it's not, but you just you
Of
think a
course
lot
you
of
feel
crazy
that
things
way.
too.
Of course you feel that way. Yes. Grief is hard. It's hard on the mind.
Mhm.
It's hard on the body,
Yeah,
hard on the spirit. And you're right.
yeah,
It takes everything you have to just process getting out of bed the next day.
right. Yeah, yeah.
So, do you mind telling us about the rabbit hole? You mentioned the rabbit hole, and what is the significance of that now?
Yeah, that was actually coined by Matt. That's what he would call it. And in that in my mind, I would see like, Alice in Wonderland, that kind of that
Yes.
idea,
Yes.
because it was a different world, an escape almost, and it was caused by grief, but it was you would decide, will you like walk around it or will you allow yourself to go in it that day? And so it was just, really leaning into grief and letting ourselves cry hard.
Mm,
One of the triggers for me specifically has been pictures. And one day, Matt came in, and this was pretty early on, probably within the first month or so. And I was just sitting there on the bed, scrolling through my phone, like I have an album of Jadon that we, threw together for the funeral and things like that. So I just zoomed up on every picture on his face and um that was the rabbit hole, deciding that will I go there today? Will I allow myself? And that was one thing that I learned. The Lord's given us so many kind people, really, and resources to help us navigate and walk through the valley. And that was one thing that I was told early on, you can even schedule your grief.
right.
Sometimes you can't. You can just totally ambush. Something will happen.
Yes.
But there were days when I was like, it's a Tuesday. March 21st was a Tuesday.
Mm,
And it's a Tuesday and I'm gonna just write today and I'm just gonna cry
mm,
and I'm just gonna let it. And I don't do that as often now. And I think that's typical. I
yes.
don't have the deep grief days nearly as often. But allowing that, and I think that's so healthy. And I'm so thankful that people encouraged us in that.
Yes.
Um, just it's okay. It's okay to lean into it. There's a balance as a Christian. We know we can't just lean and fall and stay. You can't just go down the hole and stay there. And definitely, but allowing yourself those moments of going down
Yes.
that hole and just really, um, I just call it leaning into the grief.
And it's so true. It's so true. We have a couple of other podcasts, and even one of the interviews of my son, we talk about that where just you have to have timeframes where you let yourself grieve. I can remember shutting the door and just deciding I'm not going out today. Um,
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
opposite is true. If you're going to survive it, because it will kill you if all you do is grieve. If you're going to survive it, you also have to say, okay, today is a day I'm going to have to take a break from my grief or this
Right.
moment.
Hmm.
So, what what great advice. From what I have been seeing, many have come alongside you in that first year. You've had groups come, really concentrate on coming there and serving and wrapping their arms around you all. Do you think that has helped you in the ministry there, having friends come and work alongside of you? And yet at the same time, is is that also bittersweet because, Jadon's not there and involved in that?
Right. For sure. You hit it, you said it perfectly. A lot of things in life now are bittersweet,
Mm,
honestly.
hmm.
Um, we got back from the funeral on March 31st, and that evening we had a memorial service at our church here.
Okay.
And within 2 weeks after that, we had a visiting group scheduled, and they had sweetly offered to cancel. It was a senior trip. It was a small group, so we kind of
Okay.
enjoy those smaller groups. And
Yes.
so we just felt like this is God ordained this. This was actually set up over a year ago. God knew that this would, nothing is here is a surprise for him. So we felt
True.
like we should go ahead. And the couple that led the group, we knew from college, but not well.
Okay.
And the wife, she was really good friends with my sister in college. So
Oh,
um she knew our family somewhat, and they just came alongside of us. Even the teens in that group, the seniors, were just reached out to Justice in a way that teenagers do.
right.
Justice didn't feel like he had to talk about anything. They
Okay.
just, guys, they played soccer together, and but you could tell that there was just like God connected us to that
Oh,
group, and they were just such a comfort, really and truly. It's just so neat. Like I could tell you many details even about that trip, how the Lord just ordained things. He is sovereign, and so he had these little details plans. And like I just see over and over, like you mentioned earlier, like his arms around us. It was just like so many things that it was just evidence of him hugging us
yes.
through his people.
Yes.
And a group came later that summer, and they had been here a year or two earlier. And so they made like a photo album, and
Oh,
it had pictures that had Jadon was in those pictures from a couple of years before. And just, such sweet, kind things. We had an older man, some people might be familiar with him, Dr. Don Sisk.
oh,
He
yes,
like wanted to come
absolutely.
down and visit us.
Yes.
He's like 90,
I know
and he's
he's
like,
precious though. Oh,
so
precious.
he made a trip down here all by himself
I love it.
and to visit us. And just it was sweet to talk to him. He's lost his wife, but he loves
Yes.
her so much. And
Yes.
I remember talking to him a specific conversation. Here I am rambling, but I just
No, you're
little
not.
details are so sweet.
Yes.
I had told him that I struggled with something. I felt like that there were times when I wanted to see Jadon more
Hmm.
than I wanted to see Jesus. And
Yes.
I felt a guilt for that because I thought, when I get to heaven, I just want to see Jadon. And Dr. Sisk, I'm sure he was just being kind. And he said, I'm the same way. He's like, I can't wait to see Virginia.
No,
And
I
so just
listen.
so sweet.
I think that's a thing. I actually say that in the one podcast about not wanting to be a widow. The one thing I came out of that at the end with was I just thought there is so much of a guilt when you realize I'm interested in heaven now. I want to go to heaven now. Did I really want this before? And why didn't I? And I think there's a practical side to it where you know Jesus, but he hasn't lived with you physically on the earth. So
Yes,
it's hard to
yes,
picture.
yes,
So there's
yes,
that. But then,
yes.
yes, I felt spanked literally, spiritually, because I just realized, okay, Lord, for the first time, you're getting my attention. Do I really focus on you? Do I really want to heaven for you? Other
Right.
so
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. And
Yeah.
what a sweet thing that he came. And you're right. I think I can't tell you countless things that happen too that you just feel like the Lord hugging you is a good way to put it. And
Mm.
just that he sends these little reminders like, I've got you. This is going to be okay.
Right.
This is all taken care of as much as we
Right.
don't feel like it is.
Yeah.
All
I think
right.
it just helps us too. Just to comment on that, you were talking about being human and
Yes.
not being able to, because we've never hugged Jesus.
Right. Right.
But
Exactly.
I feel like he understands me because he is human and 100% God, 100% human. So we have
Yes.
that connection.
Yes.
He wept about Lazarus and we don't know exactly what was going on in his heart, but I feel like he can understand, that loss, that interruption
Yes.
of a relationship,
Well, and the
not
Bible
seeing
says that
him.
the father, he asked the father, why have you turned away from me? So in
Yes,
that moment, there
yes,
had to be because he's still feeling the human feelings
yes,
and the God
yeah,
feelings, there
yeah,
has to be that moment of grief, of separation from his father too.
yeah,
And like you
yeah,
said, the love and the feelings he had for people while he was with them on earth as a
yeah.
as a human here. Yes. You expressed your turmoil of feelings at the 1 year mark. I would like for you to tell us about that. You talked about to remind you about how the acuteness of the pain changes and the sorrow of the feeling that he might be forgotten.
Yeah, that was very real for me around that time. I would say even the first 2 or 3 months of this year. So the 1 year mark was March 21st. But I
Okay.
would say just, the holidays, Christmas, New Year's, his birthday's in February,
Mm.
and then into March. So I would say those 3 months,
Mhm.
both Matt and I struggled to different degrees. But to me, it felt like as we got closer to the 1 year mark, I almost felt like a deeper grief because I didn't want to get to that point. I didn't want
Right.
it to be real. It
Right.
seemed surreal. How could we be living life a whole year without Jadon?
Right.
How are we even doing this? Like, it just doesn't seem like it is part of our story.
Mm-mm.
It's not supposed to be this way.
Right.
And so it just felt, I guess you would say, a little bit frightening, sad. It felt very much like we were getting further away from him. We know logically, even rationally, but more specifically as Christians, that we really are getting closer to
Yes.
seeing him again with every
Yes.
passing day, including a whole year. But it was probably, just psychological for me. Just something that I really struggled with. I think, going back to what you said about forgetting,
Hmm.
people just move on.
Right.
And we both know that. And we feel like, I mean, sure, we get up every day and we walk through every day, but we feel it every day. I
Exactly.
remember, I think I posted something about this. To me, it was so graphic but so graphic and yet so well said. At Jadon's funeral, a man came up to us. He's actually Honduran, but he lives in the States now, but he made the trip to come to the funeral. And I just, there's a lot of things that I've forgotten about that day.
Sure.
But he looked at us and he said, it's like having your arm cut off.
Yes.
You can
Yes.
live. You can live without your arm, but you
Yes.
feel that absence every single day. And
Yes.
it's painful. That hole really hurts. And people move on. And so I think that's just part of the grief too. And the world can't stop,
No. And you
but
know that,
it's
but
hard. It's hard for,
exactly.
you see people moving on. Their kids are graduating college, their kids are
Ooh.
getting married, their kids are having, their grandbabies. And so all of that to me is like part of a whole there, completing a 1 full year without him. It's just
Yes.
like what we do every day, but it just seems heavy, really
Yes.
heavy to me, that date. And it's funny because my husband was the opposite. He felt almost like a relief. It's
Hmm.
funny how grief, we're
It
just
does. It
all, our
is.
grief is so individual and unique. he said, it felt uh, comforting to know that so many of the firsts we've walked through them.
Yeah, it's behind you. Yes. And I know when we would hit each first, or even when a date comes around, sometimes the weeks and leading up to it are awful. And then there
Yeah.
is a sense of, okay, well, the day's here. I've made it to this day that I dreaded so badly,
Right.
and we got through
Yeah.
it. And it's different. Like you said,
Yeah.
each event or each year kind of,
Yeah.
and the grief doesn't go away. It just sometimes it does. It hits you differently. But I can see um, exactly what you're saying in that first year mark, and all that so close together. And I do think
Yeah.
that's probably everyone's part of everyone's grief process, is just to say, I don't like that life is going on without my person, and I don't want
Right.
people to forget my person. That's
Right.
hard. That's
A,
hard.
a sweet note on that is that our church actually paid for us to go back. Both of
Oh,
our boys, my youngest is also in college now, in the same college there. And so Jadon, our sending church is right outside of Pensacola.
right,
So
right.
our sending church is in Milton. And, in the midst of all the decisions that we made, we decided to have him buried there. And
Okay.
so actually the cemetery is right next to the church.
Oh.
And so, like, all these details that God ordained, and then
Hmm.
our church paid for us. So we actually spent March 21st of this year, the 1 year mark, we spent it with our boys
That's
right there,
precious.
basically in the cemetery. Most of the day we spent
I
there.
think I saw a
And
picture of that. I remember being glad that
yeah,
you all were able
yeah,
to come back
yeah.
for that. Okay, so you also mentioned a book that you were given, Seasons of Sorrow. Why was that a help to you?
I think what stood out to us so much about that book and was so comforting is that the author had also lost his son
Mm,
a couple years before that, almost the same age as Jadon. I think his son was 20.
okay.
And they were just so, their paths in life were very similar. They were both studying for ministry.
Mm,
Um, the age that they were. And just as we read that book, somebody gave it to us right away. Like, we started
okay.
reading it together within days. We were still there at the guest house we were staying at
Okay.
near the college. And just to know that we weren't the only ones, like, with all of this turmoil, the mix up feelings and the grief, the deep
Hmm.
grief, and just walking through that as he walks through the first year of his
Okay.
life after his son went to heaven unexpectedly. It was also that
Okay.
it wasn't a car accident, but it was like that. Never had a chance to say goodbye,
Mm,
just sudden. And so and all of those similarities were just such a comfort to Matt and me.
mm.
And just when it was funny because I would read stuff and I would be like, oh my word, he could express it what I couldn't. It
Sure.
was deep inside of me, but he's an author, with a gift for writing. And so he could put it on paper and bring it out. And I was like, how does he know? It was just such a blessing. You don't want anybody to have this as part of their story, but I'm so
Right.
thankful that God put it on his heart to write that book. And yeah, it was a huge comfort. One of the things that he mentions in there, and that's kind of helped me too, as far as like just wanting to go to heaven and see his son,
Yes.
just
Yes.
that, those type of things that it was like, okay, well, I'm not such a reprobate.
No, you're not. Not at all. And the more I study grief, even in the scriptures, and David is a special comfort to me because he had different forms of grief throughout his lifetime, different losses, different things taken from him, different things, areas that he missed out on. And I think, the Psalms are just so comforting in
Yes.
expressing how
Yes.
your heart feels, and that, there's nothing wrong with feeling that way, as long as we can just continue to take that and point it toward Christ and reconcile to Christ over it. So great point. You also posted pictures of an area that you changed seasonally around Jadon's picture. And if you don't mind explaining what you do there and the significance of getting through those, all four seasons. You reminisce about the seasons here in the States, since we were just talking about that
Yeah.
off camera, so to speak, where you don't have the four seasons there.
Right. Well, I definitely knew that I wanted in our main living area, I wanted to have a picture of Jadon. And it's the picture that the college gave us. It was his that his freshman year picture, but he looked so handsome in
Mm-hmm.
it. And so I definitely wanted it to be in a place of prominence. I originally put it on the piano, but then I realized every time I sat down to play, I would just end up crying. So
Okay.
I have a bookshelf beside the piano. And so, as I'm playing it, I don't have to be looking over to the right. So that's where I decided to put it on top of that bookshelf. And at first, it was, I will say that even from the very first, my mind was already going forward to the seasons of sorrow and what would come. And I thought, I don't want to be changing this. Like, I don't want it to get to spring. I don't want it to get to
Right.
summer, And I had just in my mind, it's funny how you envision these things. I had a time lapse of
Okay.
myself, changing this, changing this,
Yes.
changing. How many times will I do this before I get to see him again?
Wow.
Um, but yeah, so at first, it was easy because I have a lot of autumn and Christmas decorations, so, but when it came to changing after Christmas, into like more of a spring theme or whatever, um, I don't know. I just felt like, what should I put here? Do I just want to put random decorations, And I thought, no, I want something significant. And some really sweet friends of ours had given us a little plaque, you could call it, that had the song "It Is Well With My Soul."
Mm.
And I think that all of us kind of struggle, like maybe at first with that thought, but I had to, in my mind, I had to really reconcile as far as it doesn't have to mean to me that it's well,
Mm-hmm.
that my son's not here.
Right.
What it means to me is that my soul is well. My soul is well because it's planted in Christ.
Right.
And Jadon
Mm.
is planted in Christ. And so what I did is I put that little plaque. We had found some of Jadon's journals. And this is just God. It's a God thing. We say that
Yes.
many times.
Yes.
It's not trite because it's true, but we had found his testimony written out a year
What a
before, like
blessing. What
a
a blessing.
year, just a short year when he was a senior in high school. He had kind of gone through some doubts and had talked things over with Matt, some doubts about his salvation. And so he'd written out his testimony and what he was trusting in Jesus Christ and not anything else.
Mm.
And so I put that journal underneath of the plaque that says "It is well with my soul," because that's what a great, incredible blessing. I am blessed beyond measure that I know where my son is.
Right. And how precious that God allowed the timing of that to be written out for you to be able to look back on and encourage your
Yeah.
heart and to know exactly that where he is, that he was sure of his salvation in Christ and sure of
Mhm.
heaven and that
Right.
you will see him again. Um, You've also mentioned some very specific people or things Jadon prayed for. This is referring to the journal. So,
Mhm.
would you share with us some things about that? I love how
Mhm.
you brought that up about God answering his prayer,
Yeah, it was
especially
a
when you felt like God didn't, referring back to when you
right,
felt like God didn't
right,
answer your prayer, so to speak.
right, right. Yeah, well, it was really amazing. That's just another thing that God uh, brought into my life. I looked in, going through things in his room, and I found a journal from 2016.
Mm.
So he wasn't faithful at journaling, it was sporadic over the years. But at this point in his life, he was 12
Oh,
and he would journal and he would write, let's see, I wrote this down so I would say it correctly. He would write where he read in the Bible that day, how many minutes he spent, and then a list of prayer requests. So this was from July of 2016 and toward the front of the journal. And his list included a missionary family going to Ethiopia, the salvation of a young woman that was attending our church, the spiritual growth of a young man whose his name is Dixon and some of his friends. And then he also was praying that our family would be more unified. Imagine
Mm.
3 boys.
Wow.
There was always something going on, right? And so like as I looked through that and I looked over the list, it was like God was telling me, I've answered all of these.
Wow.
I have been faithful. And it was neat because so the last two were specifically a result of Jadon's homegoing.
Oh, wow.
So Dixon, the last two. So Dixon, uh, he had dropped out of church. He moved in with a girl that, they had a child together. And when Jadon went to heaven, Dixon and his then girlfriend Astrid, they started coming back to church with their little girl,
Wow.
Fernanda. And so they got married this past summer in
How
July.
wonderful is that?
And the day of their wedding, this is so crazy. The day of their wedding, somebody pointed out it was the exact day, July, what was it? July 12th, 8 years later, 8 years to the day that he prayed that prayer for
Oh,
Dixon.
my
8 years later
stars.
to the day
That gives me chills.
Dixon got married and obeyed the Lord. Yeah, it's, made those spiritual decisions. And so, yeah, like that is not coincidence. It's just
Not
God
at
showing
all.
his faithfulness. And so,
I
yeah,
think
what a
another
huge
thing it
thing.
shows too is how much Jaden's life mattered. And because especially when you lose someone younger, you think, well, what do they even, did God
Yeah,
rob them of
right,
time to
right.
do things for him? And then to
Mhm.
look back on that and to see, well, his specific prayers were answered. His every moment he was on earth mattered to God. What a
Right.
blessing. What a
Yeah,
blessing.
yeah.
Um, what are some of the things you have done and are doing to honor your son? I know there were some things that happened around the 1 year mark and
Yeah, yeah. Um, the very first thing that we did, just backing up a little bit, is we set up a scholarship fund.
okay.
People were so kind and good to us. People don't know what to do, so they just send money. Because like, you can't make anything better.
Right.
But there were a lot of expenses that
Sure.
you don't
Travel
even
and
realize.
funeral and
Right. Yeah, all of that stuff. You don't even realize how expensive it is to go ahead and pass from this life.
right.
And so, but we were able to set up a scholarship fund in Jadon's memory at the college.
That's
And
wonderful.
so, yeah, so that was super exciting. We actually set it for $1,900 and it's a yearly thing. But
Okay.
19 is Jadon's special number. So
Oh,
Matt
that's
just like,
nice.
let's do it for $1,900. And so it's
Okay.
awarded to a student. And the college, the way they do that is it's invested. And so it can go on and on
Oh, wow.
yearly.
Okay.
Yes. And so,
Okay.
yeah,
That's
so
amazing.
like the Lord just opened that up. So there's a Jadon Goins Memorial Scholarship Fund that are, like you can apply and get that there at the
And get
college.
that
So
fund. And can you
yeah,
also
so that
give
was,
to that fund? Can you add to that fund? Or do they
I'm sure
take
that
it
you
and just
could.
like you said with the
Yeah.
investment? Okay.
They invest it. Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that would be
So
just contacting the
yeah.
college, probably
Yeah.
Pensacola
Yeah.
Christian College. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's pretty exciting. And so that was obviously all of those things are bittersweet. There's that word again.
Yes.
But so this year, back to the 1 year mark and, honoring him on his birthday. So there is a really sweet couple from our church in Florida. They still do head up the singles small group.
Okay.
Um, Flax and Sid and Flax Covington. And so their son had become friends with Jadon. And
Mhm.
so, it affected their family. They had, I guess, had a dream to start a coffee shop.
Yeah, sure.
And so, like, within a few months, actually in July, no, I'm sorry, it was June. I wanted to make sure I got that right. June after last year, so about 3 months after Jadon went to heaven, they opened up their coffee shop that's called the Covington Mercantile and Coffee Company. And it's
Okay.
right near the church and actually right near the cemetery where Jadon is buried. And so they decided that they would start this coffee shop, and they did like a wall, and they put Jadon's story on that wall
Oh,
as
wow.
a memory of him, in honor of him. They have 2 coffee drinks that are named in honor of him. One is called the Goins Strong, and the other
Nice.
one's Jeremiah 33:3, which is, we decided, probably was one of his favorite verses. And that's kind
Okay.
of been a verse that's been mentioned a lot, since his homegoing. And so this past February, our family spent the day there. We were able to offer those 2 drinks for free. And so it was just kind of like a celebration of his life and a memory of his name. We had shirts made that have his silhouette, and around the silhouette is a quote from a testimony that he had given the summer before, that happened to be videotaped, happened to be recorded. It didn't just happen to be, the Lord
Right.
knew, but
Right.
it's a really good quote about how we spend our lives, to make them count for Christ or not. We also had tracts made with his story, and
Okay.
I'll send these to you too, but
Okay.
it was a dream of mine to be able to just um, use that story, use his
Yes.
story for God's glory. And um, that's just what we desire more than anything now. So we had
Absolutely.
a track made with his story, but with the gospel,
Okay.
to hopefully be a witness and a testimony to others, and bring more into the kingdom. I know that's what Jadon, wanted to do with his life
Yes.
anyway.
And that's the ultimate
Yeah.
goal.
Yeah. So those are
Well,
some things.
those are wonderful things. I so appreciate you sharing out loud with us your heartfelt feelings that are difficult to talk about. And I know that, I mean, I know you think about him off and on all the time, but I know that to sit down and write these things out or rehearse them with me is not easy. It's
Right.
hard. So I'm
Right.
very, very thankful
Thank
that you
you.
would share it with us because,
Yeah.
like you said, the ultimate goal is that people would look at us but see Christ, and that they'll see
Right.
how that you are doing in your grief and bringing honor and glory to him in the midst of it all.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that
Thank you.
very
Thank you
much.
for asking. It really is an honor. I appreciate it. And yeah, may the Lord get the glory.
Hey, that's my Nana. If you're watching on YouTube, to like and subscribe. If you are listening on the podcast, please like and follow. We would love for you to do that now to help our channel grow and become a blessing to others.
We appreciate you joining us today at Speak Your Grief with Sonia. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube as new episodes are added weekly. Thank you again for joining us as we unpack our grief. We hope you have been reminded that you are not alone in this journey.